Hi, welcome to the Pipe Up podcast. I'm Jacey Normand and I'm joined by my co-host Jamie Jones-Buchanan and a very special guest, Tanya Arnold, who I'm going to introduce you to in just a few moments. Now, do you dread the thought of speaking in public? Does it fill you with horror? Would you do anything to avoid it? If the answer to that question is yes, then you're in the right place, because this podcast is all about improving our communication through the power of speech, connecting to audiences through storytelling and becoming more comfortable being uncomfortable in the arena of public speaking. Now, Tanya Arnold knows a lot about public speaking and presentation. She is a sports presenter. Many of you might know her from Look North. She was also one of the anchors of the Rugby League World Cup back in 2022. Tanya, I'm really interested to speak to you today because as another presenter, I just would love to get your insight into all of this. I always think that as a presenter, you're expected to be able to turn into anything at the drop of a hat, almost like we don't need any preparation. You'd be able to introduce that extension lead over there to a live audience if you needed to. Do you feel that?
Yes and no. I mean, I think and you will have gone through the same experience. You know, I look back when I first did it and I didn't get any training. You know, suddenly I found myself on the television reading an autocue, which is a very, very strange thing. And you evolve, you learn how to do it. You find your own way of doing it. And I think you find your own voice. And I think that is actually one of the keys to being a presenter is finding your own voice. There are people that you take tips from. There are people that you admire, but ultimately you're not them. So there are things that you can take from them, but you've got to find your own voice and your own way of doing it.
It's so interesting that you say that. I'd never really thought of it like that before, but it is true, because if I look back at some of the stuff I did at the beginning of my career, it's awful. I would never want that to surface again. And you definitely evolve and change as you go on. You do take things from people that coach you along the way. But ultimately, I think it's a confidence thing, isn't it? That you become confident in the way you sound and how you look. And it's a real journey, actually, when the two of those things to come together, isn't it? The vocal image and the visual image.
Funny enough, I had very little training. I think partly because I was sport in a news environment and sport was very much a sort of thing. It was slightly looked down on by news, if I'm going to be honest. You know, I've done since I went freelance a bit of looking back and talking. And one of the things I've always said about my job when I look back is it was lonely. It was lonely out on the road being a woman doing it. And it was very lonely in the newsroom, in that on the whole, the other journalists in the newsroom I was in were not interested. And particularly the women sort of looked down on you for doing it. So it was quite a lonely path to finding my own voice and finding my own way of doing it. I did get some training along the way, but funnily enough, Mark Chapman, who I now work with a lot, his first live television presenting was in Rugby League, and I was the touchline reporter for it. And, you know, I work with Chappers a lot now, and he'll go and do an Ashes test at 3 a.m. and then go and do 6 hours of radio straight off the back of it, just because he loves doing it. And I always wonder if he gets nervous. That day he must have been nervous because he had never done it. And I couldn't see him. I had headphones in so I could hear him. And I could hear him just slowing his voice down so that brain and mouth were in sync. I could hear he stayed in the same rhythm of the way that he talked, and I could hear it. I could hear it and I mentally banked that as, oh, that's really, really clever, of just giving yourself the time, because one of the things with nerves is you tend to speed up and you go 10 to the dozen, at which time you trip over and say. So actually watching people, you know, yes, getting some advice, the odd bit of training along the way. And we have a wonderful guy called Rob Nothman who does work with us at BBC Sport. But that was quite, you know, I'd been doing the job for quite a long time by the time I got Rob Node, as it's affectionately known in BBC Sport.
It's funny, actually. It's one of the things that we've talked about before, is having that mind and mouth connection, and slowing down is so important in order to have that. But one of the geniuses I think about working in sport as a presenter is that you have to turn into such a multitude of different sports. And, you know, you might have one or two of those sports that you are an expert in. But I always find it really amazing that, you know, you can talk about the golf, you can talk about the Olympics, you can talk about the football, rugby league, whatever that is. So how much prep do you have to do in order to be able to do that?
It's one of the funny questions as a woman doing this. Do you really like sports? And you're like, I don't know if you could do this if you don't. I always loved sport. I watched a program called Grandstand when I grew up, which had all the sports on it. You know, I love watching the Olympics. You'll sit and watch fencing. It's the only time in 4 years I will watch it. I genuinely do like most sport, not all sport. Funnily enough, I'm back doing sports news now over in Salford, and I'm not doing it every day, so I'm doing shifts here and there. And it's world as well, because they've merged the two. So I'm having to talk about basketball and the NFL and stuff like that. And I did find myself checking the basketball reports before I went in for an early shift to find out. So I wouldn't tell you I knew about basketball, but just so I had a bit of a handle on it. But there are also other people in the newsroom who are going to help you out. But you are expected to know. And if you make a mistake, my word, you know about it. There is a breadth of it. And I think particularly as a woman doing this, if I make a mistake, it's because I'm a woman. Apparently I made that mistake because I'm a woman. If Jamie went and did it, he wouldn't have made that mistake because he's a man.
Tanya, we've known each other for a number of years now, and you've been a guiding light for me coming out of sport.
Can I just say, having interviewed you and had you as a guest for mentioned to be asked questions by you is a little bit peculiar.
It's a genius of the podcast.
It's all about the learning. Coming out of sport, being interested in storytelling, conveyance of information. You've been a great mentor. You give me lots of advice. You talk about Matt Chapman there, who's a genius. Like, we both think the world of him. I'd like to delve a little bit into your origins and try and understand the difference between the vocational Tanya Arnold, the holistic version of you, what it is you're passionate about, what you like about your work, versus the professional one, which we're talking about, which is the development of skills. What is it about what you do that you're passionate about, that you love doing?
I think it took a little while to find that out. I didn't dream of being a sports reporter. I loved sport. I was a tomboy. No surprise there. I played a lot of different sports. But again, I liked cricket. I got to a certain age where you couldn't play with the boys anymore. That's the end of cricket, because I'm of an age where there weren't women playing cricket. Same with football. I was a jack of all trades, but not brilliant at any of them. I went off and did an English and theatre studies degree. And I always say that the big parallel for me, I love the theatre and I love that live performance, that sport is the great unwritten drama. You don't know the ending. Yeah. But for me, I'm not a stats person. They put stats up at the end of each half, when we do a rugby league game, and I'm like, it's numbers. And you will know what they mean. I will know what some of them mean because I've been doing it long enough, but it doesn't interest me. It doesn't interest me that he did X number of carries. It interests me where he came from, who helped him get there, who helped her get there. And in a play, in sport, it's the story of how they got there has always been the thing that I loved. And I loved telling those stories, but actually not being in them, which when I came to make a show when I left the BBC was a bit of a nightmare, because my best favourite bits of television, I wasn't even in them. I'd done my job well enough asking the questions that the story told itself without me appearing in it at all. So it's always been the stories behind it. I know stats are very important and all the rest of it, but it drives me insane when you have a commentary that's just riddled with statistics. I don't want to know that 3 years ago in a similar game he made 20. I don't want to know. It washes over me. But the stories behind those people, the people who've helped them to get there, because there's such a team of people behind each individual, even if they're in a team. That's the thing that I absolutely love about it.
So in the journey of mastering your craft then, if you was to dial right into what your gift is, almost give it a title or an explanation, what do you think that would be? What are you really good at?
I was once sent on a very short, they got a presenter trainer in and people were given 2 hours here. And I said, am I going to say no? Well, I'm presenting. Well, all right. Literally gave me 10 minutes. They gave me a 10-minute slot with this woman.
I think I might have had that same training. I think they came to the Northwest as well.
Sat you down and said, so what do you want the audience to know about you? And internally, I won't repeat because this is in public what I thought, but basically not a lot. Thank you very much. But I'm quite eager to please. I like to try to get the right answer. So I'm flapping around with this. But it was something that stayed with me because I couldn't answer the question. And actually, when I did think about it, and it was quite a good exercise latterly, that it's not about me, and I care about what I do. I care about what I do. I've always grafted really hard. I was never the best. I'm not necessarily a natural, but I've worked really, really hard. But it's not about me. And actually, I see my role as a facilitator. So when we're doing the rugby league together and we're out pitch side or whatever, it's my job to get us on air cleanly, to get us from A to B, but ultimately to ask you the question so that you can show off your knowledge. Because my opinion doesn't matter. I've never played the game. I have an opinion because I've watched a lot of it, but it's an irrelevance to it. And when it works really, really well, you can shut up and just let people talk, and they'll talk between each other. The more experience they get, they'll even bring in, the analysis for you, and it's happy days. I'm sat there with my feet up. But I think at that point, I've done my job really well, because they're relaxed enough to do that. They're not worried about what's going on, because they know I'll jump in when we need to jump in. And it's a conversation, so that actually I might be a presenter, but I look at myself more as a facilitator.
It's so interesting you say that, because that is one of the things when I do public speaker work with people, one of the things I want them to know is that it's a conversation, it's circular. As soon as you say it's public speaking, or, you're talking to an audience, that creates a barrier between you and them, and you feel really nervous. And just drilling down into that point you make about being self-absorbed, that if you're not self-absorbed when it comes to presenting, I also think that's almost one of the most important aspects of public speaking, is if you think too much about the audience, you wouldn't be able to do it. Whereas it's not about you, it's about them. And it's great that you've actually just echoed that there. Do you feel that it's more difficult to connect to live audiences versus, when I say live, I mean TV audiences where you can't see them, or live audiences where you see people face to face? What's more difficult for you?
I didn't do anything in front of a real people, whites of eyes, for years and years and years and years and years. Partly, I had a very full-time job and a young kid, and we had Harry Gratian, who did all of that. Yeah. He was out every night doing that kind of stuff. So the first time I saw the whites of people's eyes, I was terrified. I mean, I was literally stood the side of a stage. Yeah, and I'm been very, very lucky. I don't get anxiety, but just sort of like feeling, oh my God, I don't like this. And I find often we do a big award ceremony together, and you can't really gauge it. You've just got to do the job, because it's a big audience, and you know if the interview's gone well just because we've done a lot of interviews and stuff, but I don't know how it's getting reacted on down there, because I'm not sitting watching it. We've just got to go through what we've got to go through, whether we think it's right or wrong to a certain extent. Where you hope you can bring it alive is in the interviews and all of that. And I think there's an element of, I can't spend too much time thinking about whether table 8 are enjoying themselves, because I'm not on table 8, so I don't know the answer to that. You've got to do the job that's in front of you. Telly's a really weird one, because there are different forms of it. When you're doing stuff with auto cue, I find myself quite locked in to that. It's not necessarily my happy place. I know a lot of people much prefer it. The beauty of doing live sport is you can be reactive, you react to what's around you, and you can just have a little bit more fun, I think, and if we've had balls, landing on top of us and all the rest of it when we're doing things, and, you find yourself practically getting tackled, and you can just relax and have it. And I think an audience, when I'm watching, that's what I react to. But I think if you spend too much time thinking, do they like this? Is this right? You can't do your job.
Do you ever try and read the room? Because I know I do sometimes, and I never find it that easy if I do read the room, because, for example, you can be as well planned as you like, but then you might turn up and a major event has happened before. I did an event a few years ago on the day that the Queen died, and it was meant to be a really happy event, and then obviously the whole thing changed, and you have to be able to flip the switch very quickly in that circumstance. Is that something that you've ever had to do?
Well, I'm only just starting to do things where I have to talk about myself, and I find that really difficult, because, as I've said, it was never about me, and to a certain extent I probably need to start writing it all down and going with it, but I haven't on the whole, because they've been different things, and I've always been very, very wary about doing anything after dinner, because I don't think I'm funny. I don't that thing about entertaining people. It scares me. It's not. I've done the odd one. I did one partly because it was related. They were raising money for MND, and I kind of knew my way into it. And I did a couple of funny stories about being in dressing rooms and stuff like that, but I was always going to end on telling the story of doing the interview with Rob Burrow, because that's why we were there. Yeah. So it had, when you make a piece of telly, it's got a beginning, middle and end. That one had a shape to me. I did something the other day, and again, I thought about it, but it had a title, and I started to go with the title because it seemed to me to make a lot more sense. On what they liked, apparently, all the comments I got was my vulnerability, because I talked about the fact you talked about the professional. I'm actually quite shy. And when I'm going freelance, going and networking, and no longer having that job title of being the person from I found that deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And I've dodged a lot of events because I sort of created a person. I created the person who's on the telly. It's not necessarily me, but when I'm in that room doing that job, that's who they want, and that's who you can hide behind.
To deliver a presentation might be the first opportunity people get to speak publicly, or doing a best man speech. If you're a male.
Again, best man speech, because again, you're expected to make people laugh.
The pressure is really on for people doing those speeches.
And people do get terrified.
Yeah.
So if you was to give anybody any advice, you mentioned there a 3-part preparation, start, middle and the end, and you also mentioned the word vulnerability. Any more key frameworks or words out there that might give people a clue as to how to prepare as best they can?
There are a lot. I mean, I would never tell somebody how to do a best man speech. I would genuinely terrify me. I've done a couple of things with businesses, and if you're in a business doing a presentation, there's an element of this isn't about you. This is about the information you're giving. They are there to find out about that information. So don't worry too much about you. It's very difficult. Yeah, I think also as a woman, we worry about what we're going to wear, what we're going to look like, and all of that. Partly because of that's the social pressures, certainly in a TV world. It's the thing that irritates the most. I mean, what the hell am I going to wear?
Same.
It's a whole thing because we get picked up on stressful. It because people are, it's a whole, but, wear something that you're comfortable in, that makes you feel good. It may be a piece of jewelry. I've got a lovely little green, and so quite often I'll just, whatever it is, we'll go around that because I just really like it. Of just something that makes you feel like you, sort of deep down. It might be the underwear you wear. It might be something, whatever it is, but just makes you feel like you.
Just maybe don't share that with the
Well,
audience.
no, I'm not saying, but, it is just that it's getting your head into the place where you feel you.
Yes.
And you feel comfortable. And don't, try to move, point at things.
Yeah.
Partly because if you point at something, on the whole, your brain will go with you. So if I point at it immediately goes with it. And it's same with live telly. I've told to people, who are doing their first live, point at, over there they've got, because you'll immediately go with it. But also movement is good. It relaxes you. Breathe. Remember to breathe. It sounds really stupid. I do it the whole time. One of the really difficult junctions in live telly is going from chat to read, because you haven't got your breathing right. Doing the podcast yesterday, and it's fine. You can edit it. But I'm halfway through just reading the end, and I have my breath's all over the place. I can't breathe in. And as soon as you think I can't breathe, you can't breathe. And everything gets trapped. So it's little things. But you and I have had this conversation of read out loud, because there's an element of getting used to hearing your own voice. There's an element of telling a story. So even if it's facts, you can bring it alive. It can be quite dry, but if you read it really monotone and dry and like that, everyone's gone. You've lost them. Not that you've ever done that. Yours is more a speed thing, of slowing you down. Never ever can you be accused of not being animated. But it is an element of getting used to. And when you read something back, always read it. If you're going to read it out loud, because there'll be words you find you can't say, combinations of words, or you've used the same word a lot. And until you read it out loud, you don't spot that.
Tanya was great. I don't think I've ever told you a story, Jacey. I've always been comfortable with people. So when I did a little bit of acting, I loved the stuff in the round rather than being on the stage, because I can hear people's breathing reaction and I just connect. I can't do rehearsals to like a camera with nobody there. To me, I just get bored with myself. But when there's people there, I really do connect. The interesting thing, when I've done award ceremonies with Tanya, it means having to read from a script, and I've really struggled to read. The time it takes me for my eyeballs to move from there down to the page, start reading, feels like an eternity. And then that warm flush comes over me. And Tanya gave me some great advice. Read out loud and read whatever you're reading like a Mr. Man book, like a child's story, which obviously I like eating loads of eggs, Mr. Muscle and all these, Mr. Tickle. But I read my Bible every day, and I started to read that out loud every day, a bit like you might do a children's story. And it's helped me now end, little tips like that. So my next question for you, really quick, Tanya, is writers need to learn how to read. Speakers need to learn how to listen as well. How important is listening? Because this is what Matt Chapman is really good at. So he can ask one question, that's it, and then everything else will feed from that. That'll be the seed. So how important is listening?
as you say, I mean, you sit and watch the telly, and there are times I rage, partly because actually you always do your prep, you always do your homework on something, particularly if you're doing a longer form interview. There are stories that you want people to tell, but you want them to tell them. You don't want to show off that you've done your prep and you know the story. And I've listened to presenters, almost they're answering their own question and they stop, and the person who's there, I want to hear what they say. I don't care that you've done your prep.
Yeah.
So there's an element of that, of have it in your back pocket, because if they don't go where you want them to go, you've got to nudge them to it and get them there. But I want you to tell the story. But there might be something in that. So you say that, and it's quite hard when you're doing the live stuff, because the amount of voices and noise, and you've got a PA system and you've got players running around. Sometimes, particularly if it's an analysis run, you'll have seen me go, I'm looking at it, where the heck am I going next? At which point there's also a trust element when you're doing it. But if you're not listening and picking up on something, you may as well just give you the list of questions and go, off you go, do it on your own.
Yeah.
Because you're an irrelevance to the whole process, really, because you're literally reading out a list of questions.
Or sometimes my bugbear is people asking closed questions where they've answered their own question.
Not answering your own question, but that's a really interesting. When I got trained by Rob Nothman, he pulled me up on using how as a precursor to me, and he'd gone through, I mean, he does his talk about doing your prep. He had hints, but he said, when I'm watching you as a presenter, and he was watching the Super League, it was rugby league, so he was watching a lot of Super League and a lot of live. So he said, I'm not watching you as a presenter who's worried, that the guests are not worried by you. They trust you. They know they're in safe hands, which one of the beauties of Rob as a trainer was he makes you, great.
Yeah.
So he said, so put a statement to them, say that wasn't good enough, was it? Because they've been paid to be there. They're there. They've got an opinion. And if they go yes or no, then pick them up, go with it. So I then found myself, I said to my producer this meeting, I'm going to ask, it's going to be a statement. I then said how and nearly took myself off air because internally I went, I've used how. But there's a time and a place for doing that. What I wouldn't do is stand in front of Wayne Bennett and tell him, he should have done X, Y, or Z, because I get my head taken off. So at that point, I think you have to judge what you're doing with that.
Yeah, have that emotional intelligence about when it's appropriate to use that type of language or those sort of statements, and when it's not, and that is an experience thing as well.
I mean, I hope I don't do as a presenter, I say, is to tell the story for you or tell the person's experience when you knew the experience far better than me. I've just read about it. It's for you to tell me. But the statement thing was really, because I was like, yes, we've all been taught, don't ask, yes, no. But it was a very interesting thing to have put to you. And actually, if we are working together doing rugby league or whatever, and it is people you've known for a lot of years, you can break the rules.
There was something that I wanted to pick up on that you mentioned earlier, and it was you're freelance now, and you mentioned, going to events without that BBC badge, and suddenly it's a very different world. That is something that I have really experienced since leaving the BBC, that for 20 years I was there as a presenter. And when you go suddenly, and you're asked to do events and host things, but you no longer have that badge. And for a while, I think that's the only time I've ever really experienced real nerves as a presenter, because I was almost struggling to find my identity again outside of an organisation. How easy or difficult has that been for you?
It was the networking that I found really, really difficult. Once you put a microphone in my hand, it's a bit like I've come home. I did a couple of bids because I was trying to get into, I wanted to do things that were different. I love doing the sport, and, I'm eternally, I feel like I've come home, especially when I'm doing rugby league, but I wanted to challenge myself and do some different stuff. But I didn't really know people in the business world. I hadn't done it. I hadn't had the time to go out and do that kind of thing. So somebody, I met a wonderful woman called Alex Fogel who worked for EY, who she didn't know me from Adam. She agreed to meet me for a coffee, introduced me to a few people, and in return asked me, well, it wasn't in return. She then just said, would you come to this and interview somebody for Business Beats Cancer? And on year one that I did it, I walk into this room full of business people from Leeds, didn't know anybody. They all look amazing. So I've had the panic of what am I going to wear? And there's the whole thing of I'm so uncomfortable with all of this. then I'm at the side of the stage with a microphone in my hand, and I'm going up to interview this woman, and I'm home again. I know how to do. This is what I do.
Not the bit before.
It's all the bit before in a room full of a sea of people I don't know who all seem to know each other.
Yes.
And who the heck am I with all of that? So that's to a certain extent the bit I found the most difficult and the most uncomfortable. It was much like when I went back for year 2. I knew a few people, but again, when I was up on stage doing my job, I was in my comfortable place.
Yeah. I think sometimes as well, when you do live events and certainly dinners, when you're hosting award ceremonies and things like that, one of the things that can be quite difficult is that there are so many last minute changes and so many people talking to you at the same time. And, that's a nice thing. You need to
say, I think if you do a live match, this is where I think, and that was what I wanted to ask you, that must be how sport does really help you in those situations as well, because, somebody can give you a script for a dinner and you're kind of okay with it. And I like to familiarise myself with all the scripts, so I'm quite litigious about, I almost virtually memorise them so that I know them well enough to look comfortable, so that I don't really need cards or a script. But then, so many things can change, like different people aren't turning up, other people are turning up to speak, certain people are not able to get there. And sometimes it's more the chit chat in the background that can be quite difficult to tackle on the night, as well as that you want to be social and network and meet people as well. I don't tend to.
So tell us how you tackle that in sport.
We do this, awards, and I don't. I worked with Harry Gratian for many years and did a few events with him. And you would always be sat at the same table. Harry never said, I don't think he ate for a start off, but he was around every single table. He knew everybody in the room, and he properly, and I didn't. I wanted to have food, because I don't want to be hungry. I need to feed the brain. And to a certain extent, I'm not in the zone, but, I've got a job to do. And so I'm not great at the whole networking thing.
See, I'm more like Harry in that regard, because I feel that once I've warmed the room up and I've met a few people, I've got some allies in the audience, and that makes me feel a lot more comfortable.
No, I'll know quite a lot of people, and I'll see, particularly when we're doing the awards, but I don't want to spend my entire time, to a certain extent. I think maybe it's my energy levels or whatever, but I'm there to do a job.
Yeah.
And I've always been, we go back to, I've always been a grafter. I was there to do a job. And I'd much rather than network, I'd much rather show you what I can do than tell you what I can do. Let me get up on there and do it, and you can see what I can do. And
let me just do it.
If you rather than go, hello, I've done this, that, and the other. But there was nothing. So I worked for Look North for Life Sentence Plus. And, we did a lot of live telly. I like doing live OBs. I much preferred them to a certain extent. I much preferred them, and B, it became quite difficult to get a camera crew, get an editor, make a piece of telly. So I'll just be live. It's fine. I'll just go whatever. But there is nothing, absolutely nothing in the day job that prepares me for the half-hour build-up that you do to a live game. We don't have auto cue. That's one of the misnomers. We don't have auto cue when we're doing those games.
I think that would surprise a lot of people, because I don't think people realise.
I think some presenters do.
Really?
Some presenters at live sport do. We don't, and I'm happy like that. Chapper's definitely. Chapper's just
it's more often than not now that they don't have auto cue, though, isn't it? But viewers wouldn't know that. I don't think. I don't know which do and which don't. I do know some do and some don't, but most of us don't. And I personally much prefer that. Partly because if you go from that chatting to a picking up on audio, it can be a difficult juncture. But if you've got to get to a VT and the wording's got to be there, it's a memory test. For me, I'm of a certain age now. I've never had the best memory. It's a memory test. You will have seen me go, if I've got to do the opening live, I hate that. So I stop talking to everyone. I'm don't. Yeah.
You're going, the titles are rolling, and you're going, you do that, and it's like, get it, right. Breathe. Let's do this. Let's do what we're going to do. But that first half hour, partly because when you've got talkback and you've got double ears, which again we never had because you didn't need it. You have something called open talkback, so you can hear everything. And even a studio gallery can be quite busy. It's nothing to a live game, because they're dealing with interviews coming in, with arrival shots, and I'm hearing all of that going on. Plus, you've got a PA going. And some of the ones here are so loud. There may be, during the World Cup, we had things where my guests couldn't hear which is not easy because the only way we hear each other is actually through the earpieces, and there was comms problems, stuff like that. So there is nothing in the day job that prepares you for that half hour where you have got to hit marks, because there are prepared VTs, well, some of them, not when we're doing the Super League build-ups these days, we do 27 minutes pretty much straight. But, there are marks you've got to hit. So there are the ones where you've got to remember what you're doing. I found Wembley this year very challenging because we'd obviously, Rob Burrow had died just 1 week before. I was doing the women's game, gives you that much less prep time in terms of building anything up. But we were doing a tribute VT at half time. And you don't, that's one of those ones, you want to get that right. You want to get the tone of it right. You want to get the words to it right. It meant a lot to hit it. So that was another moment where, I kind of took a time out during them just to remind myself what I'd done. I'd rewritten it, so it was kind of mine. So those are those moments. But in terms of changing who's going to present something or dealing, we had a couple at the Leeds Sports Awards this year where things, you just go with it. You just, you go with it. If it goes wrong or if it's somebody different, then we had one where they were waving. I could see it wasn't going to be the person that we were expecting to come up. It wasn't my award. It was Jamie's, but I couldn't work out who it was, so I couldn't help him. I just knew that the name he was going to read out was wrong, and that, but I didn't know what was coming instead to help him out to say what was going to go on. So we made a joke out of it and said what had happened. I think the other thing I would always stress is be honest. So I've done a lot of different sports, and I will do my prep, but I am not an expert on ice hockey, whatever. But I kind of also think there will be some people who are watching who are experts. But one of the things of working for the BBC, and particularly working for Look North, is I was always delivering sport to a non-sports audience. Yeah. You wouldn't assume there will be some people who are watching who are ardent fans who are going to pick you up on it. But if I don't know the answer, the majority of the people watching don't either. So be honest.
Yeah, it's a bit like my story of the Russian gymnast when I was working at BBC Sport. I just had to say it with confidence.
Yeah.
Say it sounded authentic, like I knew what I was talking about.
I've had a lot of Eastern European tennis players in the last few weeks, and it's Greek names.
At least there's a pronunciation unit at the BBC though, so that's quite useful. Do you use them anymore? Are they gone? Have they gone since I left?
Yeah.
Wow, another victim of the cuts.
Tanya, I've got to try and unpick this, what you're talking about there, about being uncomfortable networking, which is somewhat linked to work. I'm assuming you're not uncomfortable when you're in a room full of people just for casual purposes. You get invited to an event. Is that a time when you're all right networking, not for professional means, just for social means? Or is it actually that you're not that comfortable being in rooms full of people?
I'm quite shy.
Right. So I find that fascinating, by the way, to be able to do what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I am quite, so I've got a lot, I'm in my 50s now, so to a certain extent, I've lived with myself for quite a long time, so I kind of know. But at the school gates, when Arch was, my son was little, you'll see all the mums talking, and I was working. I wasn't going to the mums and tots groups. I wasn't in, and I was also in the next door village as well to where the school was. So I'm not going to bounce up and go, hello, I'm Arch. I just, I'll wait for him to come out, take him home or whatever. And I don't go to lots of big parties. A group of 6, 8, that's why I'm really, I'm happy because you can talk to me, we can have a proper conversation. I'm going to something in London in a couple of days' time, and I'm going to know 2 people in the room, one of whom's birthday it is, so you're not going to talk to them. And my best mate who wants me to go because her husband's not going. So, and I want to go for the experience because where we're going sounds absolutely fantastic, and it'd be lovely to spend an evening with her. But I'm slightly kind of reticent about who else is going to be around the table. And but because you're in a smaller setting, reasonably comfortable with it. So I think a lot of it comes from upbringing, all the rest of it. If you put me on a psychiatrist's chair, I could talk you through the whole thing, I'm sure. But I'm not one really for massive groups. I'm not one who's got millions of friends. I've got friends, but I'm not masses of them. I've got really good friends and I do make new friends. It's not like I've only got the group that I've known, but. I'm not one really for big groups.
We've not asked you as well, just thinking out loud, because I know you that well, sometimes take it for granted, but you will appear in people's televisions on the front rooms on a regular basis. Is there an element of, that's Tanya Arnold as well, that you've got to sort of deal with when you're out in public and dealing with family?
I have a voice that's more recognisable than my face. So if I keep stum, They might not know who I am. There's also Look North was. Look North in the early days was a huge audience. It's sort of, as all television, live television, it sort of scaled back. So there were, you knew there were areas you were going into where you would probably be recognised. But actually, it's one of those that people do a double take.
Right.
So often somebody who's with me might notice that somebody's just gone, it's that, whereas you just keep walking or whatever. But came from Harry, actually, of one of the things with regional telly that is an absolute privilege, that is not, it's not the same with national telly where they're sat behind a table and telly. Regional telly, you are in people's living rooms. They are having their tea while they're watching you. And you could imagine being sat on the sofa next to you telling you what had gone on that day. That was his absolute art. And he was absolutely brilliant at it. But he taught me what an absolute privilege it was to be invited in to somebody's sitting room while they're having their tea and let you talk to them. And so I was always quite comfortable with that, and I was always very respectful and grateful of that, particularly, when I left, and some lovely things people said, and now, you see, they say they miss me, and which is lovely. It's just really, really sweet. I will tell you a story. I went to a rugby league game soon after I'd finished at Halifax, and the games happened. They'd won. It was very much a game of two halves, to use that cliche. We've gone back into the room we were, and it was an older couple, and my party trick, I can talk about sport. So we were chatting about, what did you think of the game? And the woman, so put her arm on my shoulder, and she said, can I just say, what you've done, it's fantastic what you've done. I'm a real fan. It's absolutely brilliant. And the bloke went, aye. You've done okay. Not going to lie, when you first came on telly, a woman doing sport, it wasn't right. I didn't like it, but you've done okay. And I've told this story since a few times. I'm happy to have that on the gravestone. You did okay. Because I can imagine when I first went on, literally across Yorkshire and Lincolnshire at that point, they were like, it's a woman. that woman has just told me the football's because that's wrong. Because
she ever played football.
There weren't women doing what I did.
Yeah.
So it's been a roller coaster of a ride in that sense. And I thank my lucky stars there was no social media for them to tell me that I shouldn't be telling them the football scores.
It's interesting, and you refer back to your earlier career. I think it's changing now. I hope it's changing. I've got two daughters, and I always say to them, the fact that they can play sport, they can play football, they're encouraged to do those sports that they were never allowed to play when I was at school. I think that will change the face of broadcasting, because no longer will people be able to say, what do you know about football? You've never played it.
Except it's come back, hasn't it? I mean, that's come back. That I thought we had sort of broken through quite a bit of that.
Well, has it then? I wanted to ask you that.
The whole Joey Barton thing, I'm just going to call it a thing. What he's done is open the floodgates again to just abuse. Commentators, the vast majority of commentators and presenters have not played professional sport. Gary Lineker has played football. He is a rarity and somebody that has translated then to a presenter. Actually, when you put him on other sports, he's not as good as he is when he's doing that. Mark Chapman, to my knowledge, has never played any sport professionally. He is the best presenter out there, bar none. Nobody says to him, what do you know? You've never played sport. No. Because I'm a woman doing it. What do you know? And, same with commentators. The vast majority, tennis is a slightly different one where they have and cricket, but on the whole, and it'll be television, not the radio commentary that they've done it. But, on the whole, the commentators are hugely skilled. On the whole, they have not played the sport they're doing. Yet you will be questioned now for being a woman. I don't want a woman telling me about that. There's no difference. And for the pundits, what I found is actually a lot of the female pundits will work harder. They really do know their stuff. Across a live broadcast, when we are doing a game, we talk, particularly if you've not got many VTs, we will talk for a long time. You are not going to get every word right. You are not going to phrase everything as perfectly as if you sat down and wrote it and read it back to yourself and rewrote it because the phraseology is not quite right, because you're live, because it's noisy, because you're thinking on these, because you didn't know what question I was going to ask you and I've gone and asked you it anyway. But the women now are under a scrutiny because of what he's done. So
it's been a step back.
Yeah, a massive step back. And some of what they deal with, I'm glad to say, I've been very lucky. On the whole, I've skirted around that. I didn't do football. I did football in the day job. There was a point where I might have gone for doing the sort of match reporting for final score and stuff like that. But we had a kid. My husband was a football commentator, and he worked on Saturday. I don't regret that in any shape or form, because I'm not sure I'm thick enough skin to have dealt with some of the unbelievable abuse. I got abuse, mostly about my voice. I've had my sexuality questioned on numerous occasions. And we were chatting earlier of, we used to punt for what was Twitter, send us your messages on. And I always said, I don't want a live feed of that. Not because I can't take it, but I'm not going to be live broadcasting and have somebody question. That. Yeah, I don't need that. Thank you very much.
Perils of social media.
You've got a depth of lived experience there, knowledge as well. And there's two really important questions I'd like to sort of throw at you. And it's around teaching. The prevalence of women's sport now, it's only increasing. We talked about Danica Prim obviously going to the Olympics, loads of opportunities to come out of rugby league. Got this great opportunity now, worked exceptionally hard as well, by the way.
Incredibly hard, yeah.
She's outstanding. But just your interest in teaching, people say quite often the best way to master a craft is to teach it. Have you ever had any interest in that? And if you did, certainly looking into the future, the diversity now of media, the way that it's delivered, consumed, the subjective creativity, and that you don't need a producer or a broadcast station anymore. Anybody can be their own media host. Is it something you're interested in? And where do you see it all going?
Some of it. I mean, I liked the one-to-one. So, there were 2 or 3 people that I worked with at Look North where, I loved it. The person who is now the sports reporter of Look North, I had to push to get her the opportunities to do it. And now she's doing it. She's absolutely brilliant. She's going to the Paralympics for BBC Sport. And I'm immensely proud of her, partly because her journey is an incredible one in what she has personally overcome, which is, for another day. But, I'm just immensely proud of her. And she is very much her own person doing the job. There's another guy who, again, for one reason or another, they weren't letting him go on air, and I got him for 3 weeks, the person I was working with, and it was really, really easy. Just nobody had taken the time. Yeah. The chinks in the armor with him was he was overwriting something, and you only have so much time. So his delivery was appalling because he was trying to pack it all in. So the first piece he did, I said, show it to me before you show it to the producer. Went into the edit suite, and he'd used some archive footage. Lovely. And I said, is there not commentary on that? He said, yeah, but we haven't got time. I said, mate, you can take anything and make it black and white. And I could see the editor look at me with, and I said, look, I said, get rid of, you're going to have to pare it back. I want to hear that. That's what, and this piece goes out, and I look at one of the producers who wasn't putting him on air. It's not bad, is it? She said, all right. Next thing was you are only allowed 1 minute of footage from Sky or whatever. It's broadcast rules. So he's come along and he's written 59 seconds. I said, mate, I'm not even going to read this. You've got no hope of delivering this. And again, you go back to what's your audience? They don't need to know this detail. Yeah. Get rid of it. You've got a fighting chance. And he went and did a live. By the end of the 3 weeks, he was live in Man City, an FA Cup game, with the BBC Sport crew. So Lineker is there presenting. He's using a BBC Sport pundit, so it's nobody knows it, and he delivered a absolutely brilliant live. And I was like a proud parent. I was practically in tears watching him. I was like a proud parent just going, and he's now, he's absolutely flying and he's presenting and stuff like that. But he would ring me up and go, you started that piece with a clip. So there are ways of making a television, but a lot of people, you'll have a voiceover, as it's called, then you'll have a bit of talking head from whatever, and I often started with the person, but partly because you could get an extra clip in by doing that, because rather than talk at the beginning, but also I wanted their story, and often I would remove it. I said, I often do that bit, and I've explained it. The next night, I was in the studio presenting the sport. He'd done a piece, I did a piece. Both of us had started on a clip. But I loved watching him develop, and I loved doing that. Whether I want to stand in front of a room full of 18, 19-year-olds who know far more about digital media than I do, because I'm not on TikTok. I'm not going to go on and dance for you. I'm not going to eat hot dogs. And, there's sort of things you just go, know what you can do and what you can pull off, and know what
your limitations. Yeah,
and it's just, I don't want to go there. Thank you very much. So I'd love, working one-to-one with people, yes. Whether I want to lecture, I might. You never know. Never say never. But I haven't yet.
In terms of skills acquisition, like you mentioned there, so you started off with a clip. There's a subjective creative license there. that a bit like a discipleship passed on to the person that you've been teaching. If you're listening, anybody's listening out there wants to get intermediate, and it could be anything, by the way, what would be the skills that you would encourage them to pick up or focus on the most?
That's too broad a question because there's so many types of media now.
Yeah.
So that if we take the interview that I did with Rob, when he told the world that he had MND, the piece that I made for BBC Look North, I think I might well have started with the clip. I don't remember. I had to explain who he was. I didn't start with the clip of Kev hugging him, but for the digital version, which was made by a person who specialised in digital, that's what they started with because they have to get you in 5 seconds. In that 5 seconds, they have to hold you at that right at the top. So you don't build in a digital thing. You've got to get them like that.
It's clicks.
And I watched it and I thought, have I done the wrong thing? Should I have started with it? And actually, no, because where I sat in the programme for Look North, I had to tell the story. So there isn't, and also the way that I make it will be different from the way that you make it, but there is an element of it. The most important thing is you get to a point where you trust you've done it. Your way of doing it is and I will say one of the things that I miss about the day job was the deadline. I loved a deadline. Look North went out at 6:30. If your piece was not ready, it didn't go on air. The one thing you had to do was have your piece ready to go at 6:30. If I was live and a truck didn't work or whatever, nothing to do with me. There's nothing I can do about that. But that was the bit that was important. So I have to make a decision. I can have this much material. You could make it that way. You could make it that way. That person, but I've got to make it, and it has got to be there at 6:30. And so you've got to make a decision, and I did, and I loved that. And then it's done, and you're on to the next one. And I do miss that clarity of thought. Actually embrace the deadline because it ain't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So let it make the decision for you and trust your decision and don't sweat it because it's done.
Yeah, and it does focus the mind.
Yeah.
You can only fit so much into a TV
And
package.
if you give me a week, I'd give me half an hour and it's like that, and that. But don't give me a week because
There's it all saying, if you're on a job doing, give it to a busy person. In that perfection trap, we can all...
But I actually think sports people are fascinating. I did a lot with, particularly the Olympians on the whole, the younger diving. A lot of them come through and a lot of them are still doing A-levels and stuff like that. Swimmers. Their time management is spectacular. There was a fabulous diver called Hannah Starling who got 4 A-stars at A-levels while going to an Olympics. And I'm just saying, yes, she was very, very bad, but her time management, because she had to train, she had to, so her time management was absolutely brilliant.
Just delving back into that Rob Burrow clip, I think it's really important to explore that for me a little bit. And we're not far off done here, but I think the story, the Rob Burrow, and certainly the challenges that Kevin Sinfield has subsequently gone on, has all been around that narrative of friendship, emotion. And in many ways, you sort of was the sort of gateway to that, because that was the first real emotive clip where obviously Rob broke down. Am I right in thinking that originally they wanted to take that out? There was a bit protective of that, but Rob's desire, as he always has done throughout living with MND, was to be public, be vulnerable, to quote your word earlier. And so that was somewhat the power behind what's attracted that audience that's supporting MND now.
Yeah. No. So just a bit of context. If I got a call, I'd actually been told by a guy that I work with who was a big NFL fan, and there was a WhatsApp group with which Rob was on, Scott Taylor's on. There was a mixture of sort of football, rugby league, sports journalists who were NFL fans, and Rob had told them on the WhatsApp group that he had MND, and then had told a slightly rude joke, I'm told. I didn't get the joke after, but so this guy rung me and told me. I was oddly in the hairdressers, and the hairdresser did know a bit. So, and it was not my news to share. It was not, so I parked it. He said, look, this is just so you know, I don't know, you might need to know somewhere down the line. It's just letting you know. Okay, park, deal with when I'm not in the seat I'm sitting in. Gone for a walk that afternoon, and Phil Daly rang me. And I've known Phil for many, many years, and his voice was broken. And he just said to me, he said, could you be here tomorrow at 12 o'clock with a camera crew? I can't tell you why. And I said, yes. is it about the health of one of your former players? Because if it is, I've heard. And you could hear the relief to a certain extent that he could talk about it. I had a really, really weird process then of, having heard it twice in one day. What I really, really didn't want was for anybody to find out because of me, that this was not my news to tell anybody. And I'm not in the newsroom, but I do know who is producing it. Somebody with quite a loud voice who, once she knew, the entire room would know. And it also goes into a big computer system. So I had the process of ringing my newsroom saying, I need a camera crew at Headingley at 12 o'clock, and it's probably your lead, and this is non-negotiable, but without telling them why, which you can imagine went down like a lead balloon. But I was absolutely adamant about this. And I still absolutely stand by that. Told them in the morning meeting the next morning. The producer was spitting tacks with me at this point. I think she understood it because as I told it, my voice broke. And I think I'd been sort of tucked up like this as well with the whole thing. But as I said it out loud, I remember my voice breaking as I said it. So then the wheels go in motion, and we get 2 camera crews. We come down here, and I met Gareth Walker, who was a journalist at the time. He stepped away from journalists, but he worked for 2 or 3 of the tabloids. So they've got Gareth to do the sort of newspaper side of it, me and Pete, Pete Smith, the local journalist. So we come in, get shown up to a corporate box. My cameraman set up the 2 cameras. Kev comes bouncing in, says, look, it's shit, but it's going to be all right, was what he said, and kind of almost left again. Then came back. He says, has anybody spoken to Rob recently? And none of us had. So it's his voice. You can still understand him, but it's his voice. So just, and then he sort of went again. And then Rob came in, we sat down, we do the interview. And I'm normally, you're on your own or you've got a big crowd of you, one or the other. But it was, we're in a quite small room. Me, Rob, 2 cameramen, Phil, Gareth, Pete and Kev. And I'd asked somebody in the newsroom who'd gone through some fairly serious health things. I said, if I ask you this, would you, in this mode, would you slap me? What would you, because I haven't had to deal with this. I've got to go and do an interview. And you say, do your homework. But how do you do your homework for that? Yeah. But Rob very much led the way with the interview. Staggeringly, in the 3-4 days since he'd had the diagnosis, he had come to terms with it. In a lot of ways, he had come to terms with it. A lot of that was to do with seeing Doddy. And he sort of led me to the question. He sort of said, I'm all right with it. I can, whatever. And, how lucky he was, how having those. And I knew I had to go there. And it's not, I don't want to reduce somebody to tears. You don't go into an interview wanting to do that. And I ask, and I've had to, because I had to put it on a show reel, so I've heard it back a few times. And it's not, and I said, but what about your family? It must be tough on them. And I say it very much like that. And he starts to answer the question and he goes, and there's a moment, and then Kev came in and hugged him. And to some extent, I wonder if that moment also was a moment for Kevin that he instinctively did that. Yep. And there were a couple of other moments, and we get to the end, and Kev and Phil say, we don't think that should go. And it's Rob that says, no, people need to see the reality of this. Yeah. They need to see what it means. Yes. And if they hadn't, if Phil's instincts and Kev's to protect and not show that had happened, I'm not sure where that story goes. Yep. In all honesty, in that Breakfast took the film, they ran it the next day, they picked the story up, and there it all goes. But unbelievably, Rob, in that moment, dealing with everything he is dealing with, he got it. He absolutely got it. And I've always said I will never do a more important interview. I will never do a more important interview.
I think some really important lessons there, Jacey, about courage. Rob Burrows' courage. I'd never stop talking about that. That's what we've got to keep living out in his legacy. And then you said earlier about vulnerability, the importance of that in a story and that reciprocated love and emotion that came back.
But that was going back to Mark Chapman and Imposter. I won't go into the Imposter syndrome, but when he turned to you at Wembley and said, we need to talk about love. As men, we don't tell each other we love each other. To have that in the middle of a live broadcast about a rugby league game that's going to happen. was the genius of the man.
Brilliant.
Was his lived experience to a certain degree, and you responded beautifully to it. And it, but we don't talk about that, and to have that conversation ahead of what is going to be a brutal battle between some of the fittest men, as we were on the men's game at that point, you are going to have, was a stroke of his brilliance. But it was, it also did come from his lived experiences.
I think as well, the sensitivity that you handled that story with says so much about you as a reporter as well, Tanya, and a presenter, like having that emotional intelligence.
I'm not sure. I always say prepare for an interview, and I think Rob led me there. There were some questions that you kind of go with. How did you find out? What was your, this sort of the how, what, where, when, which you for every story. But Rob very much led the way. I think with how the story went, because just how he was and who he was and how he handled it throughout the 4.5 years.
It's so important to keep sharing those stories about Rob too. I just had one final question for you, and it was just about imposter syndrome. Do you ever feel imposter syndrome?
Oh, the whole time. I worked alongside Harry Gratian for a start off, and Harry was Mr. Sport. He was a legend in Yorkshire, a legend of what he was doing, and he was sport.
Yeah.
So to a certain extent, I think he probably did want to do the sport as well. And, you're doing it next to him. And I was learning my craft as well. I was learning my trade. So I had it through the day job. And then the first gig I did as a pitch side reporter, I'd had an email completely out of the blue, ended up in Perpignan. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, technically, it was a disaster area. I didn't know because I didn't know what was meant to happen. And one of our other presenters said, what does a pitch side reporter do? I don't know. Not a clue. And then the second time I did it, I rocked up to a proper BBC OB with all the trucks, and everybody knows each other, and they said, go up and see Claire, she's having her makeup done, and Claire Balding comes towards you, and you will have worked with Claire. She's this huge bundle of energy. Hello, I'm Claire. Well done.
She's a force of nature.
Yeah, she is, and brilliant. I mean, love working here. But I was the newbie, and I felt like the newbie because they were doing all the other sports that they were doing, and they all doing all. I felt like the newbie for about 10 years, and then I'm Mark Chapman standing. And as we've both said, I mean, I don't think there is a better sports broadcaster because of the range of what he does, because he can go radio, telly, back again and round.
We need
because he
podcast.
will have that conversation about what is, he will go there. He can do light and shade the way he did, with Lizzie Jones when she sang at Wembley after the death of her husband. And I had headphones in and she sang, and it was an incredible moment. And the director's going, Chappers, your mic's open. Chappers, talk. But he wasn't. He was feeling the moment. He said, go and get yourself checked, because it was all about heart disease. And, and it was just, he just gets it. And that's who I stand in for. Yeah, piece of cake, that one. But the World Cup was, so I'd do one or two. If I was lucky, I got 2 games in a season, because we've only fairly recently started doing the women's games. So that, the Super League shows nothing like those live games. So there was nothing. So it was new. Every time I did it, it was like, this is so hard. This is just so difficult. And then the World Cup, I did 19. Plus I was pitch side reporter. Plus I was doing a podcast. So you don't have time to think. And about halfway through, director called Sally Richardson, who's directed me right the way through. She was there on day dot, and she didn't actually do the Wembley final because she did Chappers, but was there at Wembley, and she's now retiring. But she said halfway through, she said, you seem much more relaxed and much more confident. I said, it's miles on the clock. It's not, I know what's coming. You don't know what's coming, because that's the beauty of live telly, but I know I can deal with it. So when we're stood that side and none of my female guests can hear a word I'm saying, we work out a way. I say, look, you can hear me, yeah? So you pick up from her, your question will be this, and you come down that, so you can hear the person you can hear. All right, this is roughly what I'm going to ask you. And you find the way.
Yeah.
But imposter syndrome, don't worry, everybody, and I bet you that Mark Chapman, when he sat in that, well, I know because Mark Chapman, he then took over from Claire Balding. We had a big team meeting the next season. He said, and we all had to go around the room and introduce us as, I'm Mark Chapman, and I've taken over from the National Treasure. So, it's in his head. He's come out with the line, so it's in his head. And because Claire, by this point, is on 2012, and everybody thinks she is So I think, find me somebody who doesn't have it.
Yeah.
Even Ronaldo back in the beginning, I'm sure.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah,
maybe
there
we'll
are
find out
some
one of our
people
future
who
podcasts.
maybe don't have it. But don't worry about it, because we all have it.
Well, you heard it here first. We all have imposter syndrome. A huge thank you to Tanya Arnold and for all of you for joining us on our podcast. If you like our podcast and you'd like to watch or hear more of them, like and subscribe or follow us on socials. We'll have more information about future podcasts appearing there in the not too distant future. Take care, everyone. See you soon.